All right, so we're finally here. You doing all right today, Thomas? North of the border?
Oh yeah, just watching the world that we live in increasingly resemble some type of a end of the world horror film. There's 80% of the folks in my city are wearing masks. The city bus service isn't charging you anymore to enter because they don't want to hold your money. Yes, things are becoming increasingly strange up here.
Yeah, absolutely. I ventured out the other day to the store, and people was in masks and gloves, the whole 9 yards. So yeah, but I mean that's just how it is right now, I guess. But
It's a brave new world.
yeah, so today we are going to be covering recordings between Jon Sharkus and Detective Ecklund, and we're going to lay out the case and let people decide for themselves. We're going to give commentary and our opinions on these different audio files, and we're not going to be able to cover all of them tonight, but we're going to cover a few of them. And then, well, like I said, along the way, we're going to have tons of different information that we're going to be able to add into this. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started now. If you can't hear, which you should be able to, but if you can't hear it 100% exactly word for word what they're saying, don't worry, because we're going to recap it and go over it. So give me 1 second. I'm pulling this first file up now.
Okay.
And then we're going to get started. So yeah.
To give a little bit of in the way of introduction to this audio, this is of course Jon Sharkus, who people who have been following this series are well acquainted with now, and he is conversing with Detective Joe Ecklund, who was the lead quote-unquote investigator, to use the term very loosely, on this case of Samantha's death. And I believe that the audio really speaks for itself. This individual, Detective Ecklund, is allegedly involved in a network of individuals who are associated with drug traffic. And I think that we should go ahead and play this audio and let people decide for themselves if, in fact, Detective Ecklund is really investigating anything.
Yeah, and that's the point. I'm about ready to play it right now. But and that's the thing. We want to put the case out there, let people decide for themselves. But I think more importantly, specifically talking about Samantha Sharkus' case, it's more of a, as far as today's video, it's going to be really, how did he look at this investigation from the very jump? Because in my opinion, this was only and ever going to be a suicide investigation. Nobody was ever going to be looked at as a murderer, and the case certainly wasn't going to be able, looked at as a murder. So without further ado, let's see if we can get this going.
Never happened. So you'll see all the reports. Like I said, people trying to throw you under the bus or whatever. So.
Oh yeah, it's so common. There's like the rumors are lying.
So the reason why it says active is, like I say, I'm being honest with you. I want to have a second set of eyes. When we found that gun, is there anything should happen to John about not coming forward to police earlier? Until after the daughter dies, should he have came forward?
That shit, the shame from the grave. There's always a price to pay.
And that's why it says active still, because I haven't got the official word from them what they want to do with that or not. Because like I said, my personal opinion, you've suffered enough. What's that going to accomplish? I don't know. What's it going to accomplish?
Holy so, seeing those eyes.
Right. So if they got to ask me in my opinion, God bless that you actually told us. So we got no kid up there that found it, and we got it off the streets. That's all I care about.
Oh, my family was living.
Because if you wouldn't have came in,
do nothing for me now.
We never would have found it. Honestly, we never would have.
But we got to make a call.
You know what? And I got the metal detector the next day. And it was only, say that's the hole. It was right here. It was just, if we would have dug over one more hole, because I took the metal detector and I said, oh, it's under a log. It was under a big, about a log block this big. It was about this. Yep, it was about this. No, you stepped out fine, but you were just, so you stepped out, let's say like this, and let's say this is the hole. You were just about a foot and a half. You want this, it was about a foot and a half from the tree. Yes. So it was about right here. And the reason was I looked at that day. I know. The batteries died out. The last guy that used it didn't use it. Put the batteries in. Same old story, like when I go to make copies, people will take the last copy, then I gotta go make copies and take a metal detector. The last guy that used it didn't put fresh batteries and left me with a pile of junk sitting there. So there we go. Mine, yeah, me too. Oh wait, so you got this down, what is going on? Really so.
I did all that thing with them, but that, this is, I mean, nuts, without phone, I don't have to back it. I'll have a phone, I'll have it.
If you were that, you'd be in handcuffs. Like I said, I told Holly, I said, that's done, over with. But I want to get a second set of eyes on this other stuff that came up from the deputies. The gun and stuff like that, and see if there's any penalty or that's Mr. Johnson. I don't think so. If you're asking me, then you suffer. What the heck is according to a hiding a dog? That's what's turning John with misdemeanor for John or the community. So.
No,
And that's my opinion, but I want somebody outside, if Chris or somebody else gets reports and she goes, this guy can get away with murder like she knew nothing ever happened to him. At least I can say I gave it to the powers that be and they agree with me. Nothing should happen because he suffered enough.
okay.
So, yeah, I'm not pushing that, John. I said, I'm not telling you that day after, but you come in and say, I'm free, I'll talk to you. I'm not going to just, it's one of the deals, I'm not going to just go get lost.
So many things. I mean, those two iPods.
Send me.
And two on the phone.
What is Q-Link? Is that a
Go on. Yeah, and then the two iPods. The two iPods, I was trying to get back out here. Two stolen iPods, I was just trying to do my thing. And keep coming down.
you got iPhones?
So,
Isn't that an iPod?
iPods was too big on. And I called and I said, I don't know who took them. Actually, had Brent O'Trainer first there saying the book. It was nice to look in my room. But I went over with Trevor Hagler and Carolyn Bednar's to the stores with. Got those two iPods. Just want to get all the stolen stuff that Sam had. I quickly tried this again. Her shit cleared it up. We found my life. And we got back to the room. Those two iPods. Poof. And I'm pretty damn sure I know who took them. I'm pretty damn sure I know who's fucking with who, excuse my language, who's storing it right now. There's something like this.
You still run 14 then, or do you go to somewhere else?
No.
Because we got some openings, I don't know if you're looking for, I think there's 2 places available in the county if you're still looking. Because my boss has to take what's up in Sharkus since he needs a spot. He else said I haven't seen them.
I have applied and including Crollo. I can't give you the list, the amount of people that I have worked with, and the phone calls I made for jobs. Applications, I've applied for 100 and some jobs.
So I gotta go talk to him to get these names of places. If you want to wait just a second, he's up in his office, I believe. Okay. So if you want to just wait, I can get you the names.
Is that going anywhere?
Yeah, because the last I heard, they said, hey, you know.
All right, so that's the first one, and right off the bat, some interesting things to note is how Ecklund says, "Well, I don't want them to look at it, and I'm going to show it to somebody else, but they're probably going to look at it, and say, well, this guy can get away with murder." I thought that was an interesting comment, but he did clarify that, he did turn the information up to the higher authorities, which is going to definitely be a conversation for the for another day, but he is suggesting and recommending that no charges be brought against Jon Sharkus. Now, real quick, what I want to bring up is we're going to put this up on the screen. And it says, that's the log Joe supposedly found the gun that I know wasn't there. So Jon is concerned that the death case says active, and Ecklund tells him, as far as I'm concerned, the death, that's over. As far as the other stuff, the stolen gun, the drugs, I just want a second set of eyes. You know, there's anything that should happen to Jon about not coming forward to the police earlier, you know, until after the daughter dies. Now I'm reading a transcribed copy of this recording, so to speak. So the second set of eyes are DA Zeke, I can't even pronounce his name, Winfield office, and if they think charges should be pressed against Jon, which Ecklund doesn't think they should be because Jon has suffered enough, what's that going to accomplish? In my opinion, God bless that you actually told us about the buried stolen gun and no kid out there found it. We got it off the streets, and that's all I care about. Then Ecklund goes over the day Jon took them to the spot in the backyard where he buried the stolen gun, and it was recovered using the police department's metal detector. This is important because Jon has told other people that Ecklund lied about, and that's what the purpose of this screenshot is. So now this excerpt is from a police report on Sam's death investigation that makes reference to Jon's role, the stolen handgun, which is used in a drive-by shooting directed at a group of juveniles. It says, additionally, Ecklund discovered under LGPD case 15-7203 that Jon Sharkus was involved in the concealment of a stolen handgun, 45 caliber. Jon stated Samantha had admitted taking the gun from a parked truck in the middle of the night. Conveniently, he saying that Sam did this. During the evening of the gun theft, someone had fired a 45 caliber bullet into a residence in the middle of the night, striking a wooden headboard where juvenile subjects were playing video games. No, go ahead, Thomas.
Well, the fact that such an incident could take place and that they would immediately elect not to file any charges or conduct any type of criminal investigation of Jon Sharkus, that they would simply accept his account like that, I think is striking. And I think that it also ties into Jon Sharkus playing this role here of assisting the police in locating the gun ostensibly. We already see Jon Sharkus in this role of kind of a asset of the police, a functionary of law enforcement, and that kind of begins to show this charmed life he seemed to live, where he had these connections to these different individuals who would intervene on his behalf and protect him. I mean, I think anyone under those circumstances, any quote-unquote normal person, would certainly be at least investigated for possible charges in a situation like that, especially considering the incident where the gun was fired and could have very seriously wounded or killed someone.
Right. And I guarantee you, me or you would have. I can promise you that. Now,
absolutely.
On this same recording, Jon goes on to tell Ecklund that he is concerned it's an active investigation because he is a suspect. And Ecklund reassures him again by saying, if you were that, like I said, you would be in handcuffs. I told Haley, the ADA, the assistant district attorney, the death, that's over. It's done. But I want to get a second set of eyes on this other stuff that came about from the death case, the gun and stuff like that, and see if there's any penalty or consequence for Jon, because I don't think so. If you're asking me man to man, you've suffered enough. What the heck is a party to hiding a gun? What's charging Jon with a misdemeanor going to do for Jon or the community? Nothing. And that's my opinion, but I want somebody on the outside. So if Crystal or somebody else gets the reports and she goes, this guy can get away with murder, like nothing ever happens to him, I guess like what we're doing right now, at least I could say I gave it to the powers that be, the DA's office, and they agree with me. Nothing should happen to him because he's suffered enough. Now, what I want to bring up is the fact that, if I can find it here.
It's interesting how that's so selectively brought out when they say he's suffered enough. Like that again doesn't apply to normal people, but you often hear those exact words being trotted out when it is somebody that they don't want to charge for one reason or another. It's
Well, I mean,
different morality applied.
The notion that you suffered enough goes back to my thoughts and opinions on you never did consider anything that happened to Samantha anything but suicide. Nobody's seen her, to my knowledge, nobody's seen her hanging from that towel except Jon. The stories and the forensic evidence doesn't match up. Now, what I have here on the screen, the no prosecution notes between Ecklund and the DA's office. So this is a report of them talking about that they're not going to press charges. And this is the dated January 23rd. Jon calls his exoneration sheet, which is right here. You have to forgive me. I had this crap in my throat. And this letter is dated January 23rd that Jon calls his exoneration sheet. Well, you can't be exonerated if you was never charged with anything and you was never going to be charged with anything. But it says that it's signed by ADA Haley Joe Johnson, addressed to the owner victim of the stolen handgun, saying their office will not be pressing charges due to the lack of evidence in the gun case. I mean, how is there a lack of evidence when the guy told you, hey, there's a stolen gun over here, and then he showed you where it's at? I mean,
yeah, that seems like an open and shut case. But I'm just laughing a little bit at the line there. I mean, why he would call these his exoneration papers when even the document itself clearly states, in reaching this decision, the district attorney's office does not mean to suggest that your version of the events was not
True.
complete or trustworthy.
Yeah.
I mean, like it's a strange technicality to rest your case on. But
and look, Tommy, here's a eerie Facebook post where Jon is gloating about how damn proud and happy he was the day he received a copy of the ADA's letter and Sam's autopsy report.
You've never seen a man holding his child's autopsy report so triumphant and seemingly happy.
Right, and if you notice, he's got that grin on his face. And I mean, I guess if he was a paranoid person, let's even if his story was truthful, and like I said, we're not gonna conclude on whether it is or not right now. This is gonna be a process. But if he's a severely paranoid person and he thinks that they didn't believe his version of events for any reason, then I guess I could imagine why. I don't know why he'd be posting it all over Facebook and all of these other contradictory statements. But I guess if he was a paranoid type person, maybe you would be happy to receive a letter like that.
I mean, when I look at this image, it does it makes me upset. Just the wording along with the nature of what he's holding. It just it's difficult to relate to. But I mean, yeah, if you do factor in, the different type of mindset that you could be dealing with and everything like that, that it could be some kind of reaction to pressure or whatever, so again, yeah, like we don't want to make a bunch of assumptions or cast judgment on anyone in particular, but this is I don't know, it's bizarre.
We're going to state our opinions on evidence. Like, this isn't fake right here, what we're putting up. I mean, none of this is fake. If we're backing it up with facts, that's one thing, but we're going to put our opinions on the evidence that is supplied, and it is what it is. The chips gonna fall where they may. But,
no, I agree.
But go ahead.
I agree, and I mean everybody should consider. I mean, when they hear from me too, that I'm influenced by biases as well. So I'm looking at this, but to me that's really bizarre behavior. To be holding up your daughter's autopsy and saying that you're so damn proud and happy. I could see that you would want you to clear your name if that's what you thought that this was going to help you do. But I can't see you using the wording proud and happy with respect to your daughter's autopsy report. And again, I
Right.
mean, when I say I have biases, it's based in part on experience researching cases like this. And you do see very often, you see these individuals who appear to be relatively on a low level societally, whatever you take that to mean. They appear to be, you know, they're a drug dealer, but then when you look into them, they seem to be a kind of a point of facilitation, a kind of an advance man or a facilitator for a larger system, a larger structure. And, you know, they use people like that. They use people like Jon Sharkus or Mark Dutroux or Gregory Allen in the Avery case. They use people like that because it's easy to dissociate themselves from them afterward. It's easy to use a guy like Jon Sharkus to supply drugs and possibly other things to, to various city and police officials, as has been alleged. But then when you get exposed, when the operation is exposed, then you can turn around and say, we don't have anything to do with him, and you can hang him right to dry.
Oh, absolutely. He's expendable. Now, but the last thing I want to say about the audio we just talked about before we move to the next one is, you know, after he implicates his dead daughter, which can no longer defend herself in the stolen gun case, Jon then goes on to tell Ecklund that his niece, Callie, stole his government Q-Link phone, which is a felony, and there are also 2 stolen iPods he's trying to get back down here that he conveniently tells Ecklund Sam stole, and he was concealing it in his storage unit. Ecklund corrects himself by saying, "You mean those iPhones?" And that's when Jon mentions retrieving all of the stolen stuff that Sam had that was in my storage unit. Now, how is it that Jon could be in possession of all this stolen property and not be charged for any of it? Suddenly, Ecklund changes direction and begins talking to Jon about him and Ecklund's boss finding a place for Jon to live and helping him out with that. Does that sound like a murder investigation to you, Thomas?
No, it sounds like a man with connections.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no way to beat around the bush. I mean, I understand that they might have a thought that, well, look, man, this guy's daughter, literally just committed suicide, but that would be understandable if you had fully investigated every piece of evidence and exhausted all options and came up with the conclusion like, yeah, this had to be a suicide. But when you don't do that and then you treat somebody like this and you don't really know whether or not it was a suicide or not, well, then you have a different ball game, because then it appears you have an appearance of a conflict of interest and favoritism, things like that. Because as we stated, an average person is going to go to, they're going to get something. I don't know what the time would be for being in possession of, if it is a misdemeanor or whatever, or if they think it'd be hard to prove who actually stole it. The problem is, and the fact remains, that it's still a crime to be in possession of stolen property.
Oh, absolutely. It would be very difficult for somebody to kind of talk their way out of a situation like that. In fact, even if you were innocent, even if you were a victim of circumstance, you would still have a lot of difficulty in that situation. Under those circumstances, you would be treated as a suspect by the police from the very outset. And when I look at that picture of him posing with the autopsy, and it goes to a comment that Linda made about him and his drug abuse and such, and the kind of environment that he cultivated and raised these kids in. It further compounds my doubt that he really had any type of that there was any type of a healthy environment for these girls. That when he's posing with her autopsy report saying how happy he is, I mean, this is a man who, if she did commit suicide, it was the environment that he cultivated around her that ultimately led her to that, or certainly exacerbated the problems that she was dealing with. And so, for him to be grandstanding afterward with the autopsy report and claiming how proud he is of, that he's not in handcuffs or whatever, it's it's a little bit difficult to fathom.
Right. And now I'm about to play the next audio, and we'll go from there.
So I actually told that Crystal raised to hell about putting a GoFundMe page on that Samantha Sharkus webpage.
Yep.
couldn't afford them.
Yeah, they don't. So what? People make GoFundMe. It doesn't make you a bad guy. I don't know what her problem was.
Me neither. I was
She's the one.
I was so livid.
She's the one that didn't even stay for her own services.
Oh, no.
So
I don't want to take language.
I use it.
I'm livid with her. But, you know, went through my mind. Can you love her that? It's a flash drive.
I got a bunch of new ones. We will give you, to answer your question, your message, we'll give you a clean one. We'll supply it. You don't need to give it to us.
Okay.
We'll give you a clean one because those are like $30 each. So
Yeah, they're here.
we'll give you a new one if it's possible. They may tell me, hey, look, you can't leave out 20%, give them 80. It's all or nothing kind of thing. So they're the experts. So with that, I'm not the one that downloads the images and stuff. So we'll be able to tell you better. So
State investigators at the
sheriff's office.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's where the phone one is, up to the sheriff's office.
Okay, because when I got back from up at Oconomowoc, I was asking everybody, what's going on here? You know, I didn't even know that room I tell until we sat down and talked. I had no idea.
We hold everything until we know it's not a crime. So, like I say, at this point, it's not a crime in my mind. So the towel is going to get eventually, destroyed, and then the phone too would also get destroyed at some point in time. But not before I attempt to try to get those photos from family photos. Because I understand that. Why wouldn't you guys as family want her photos? Of course, I would want those too. So that's why I'm doing everything I can to see it. Well, no, you guys can't have those. You can't. And that's what I'm trying to piece it so I can give you legal ones and not the illegal ones.
All right, so
Wow.
one thing that strikes me odd, and we'll be getting to in another video eventually, is right there at the end. Now, what they're talking about is that, like, look, yeah, it's understandable. Family wants to get the family pictures of their loved one off of the phone. That was Samantha Sharkus. And John's asking something about some other pictures, and Ecklund tells him, no, you can't have them. And what he's talking about there is he's talking about pictures, nude pictures that Sam had on the phone. Now, I'm not suggesting that John wanted those photos at this point in time, but I found it interesting. Like, why would you have any concern about those particular photos anyway? And there's a pretty big story surrounding those pictures as well. But we will get into that in a minute. But Ecklund. Ecklund is talking crap about the mother, Samantha Sharkus' mother, Christy, in this recording, and he starts by saying he doesn't know what my problem would be about John's GoFundMe page, and I got some. I asked for some information on this, and it said, this is something I emailed Ecklund because I thought Ecklund was actually investigating Sam's death. John's story has changed many times, and in the beginning, the detail has changed most of how long he was actually in the car. So the details on how long he was actually in the car that night, the details keep changing on that. And Ecklund makes it sound like my issue was that John set up makes it sound like that the issue was that John set up a GoFundMe page. And that's not what it was about. It was about the constantly changing timeline. Now, also, if I could find the right. Okay, now, this is that was the email that we was referring to. Now, the screenshot of the GoFundMe page. Now, you have to keep in mind that if I can find the right picture, I got like 1,000 of them here. You have to keep in mind that crap, I lost my place. Now, you got to keep in mind that John received thousands of dollars allegedly in pity party donations after Samantha died at her service at Emmanuel Lutheran Church, which is also known as, referred to by John as the Lion's Den. And
interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And and I'm not sure if y'all can hear how well you can hear the audio, but when Ecklund's talking to Jon, when Ecklund's talking to Jon about how she didn't even stay for her own daughter's services. A lot of people don't realize, and I asked information about this too, is that the mother lived in Mississippi, and they didn't have the service. I want to say now I'm probably going to be wrong on this, but I want to say they didn't have the service till like maybe 10 days after or something like that. And and the mother was planning on having her own services down in Mississippi where she lives. So yeah, it says that she lived in Mississippi at the time. Youngest was 5 years old in kindergarten, but missing school, and she was planning on having her own service in Mississippi after she received half of her ashes from the funeral home. And Jon was acting like a maniac at the hospital, and I simply didn't feel safe. And I wasn't the only one who was concerned about this erratic, violent behavior. This is a text or a message that was put up. It says, I hope not. I really do. But I do know that he yells terrible things at her 1 minute and tells her how much he loves her and needs her for the next. But because I saw it at the hospital, he is intense, downright scary, and security was on high alert at the hospital whenever, Sam was laying in the hospital on the life support, keeping her organs fresh while waiting for her, to donate her organs. So,
right. Well, there's also a account in the police files that refers to Jon strangling Samantha and her fleeing the house as a result of Jon basically choking her.
Yeah, I read that. I read that myself, and I want to say that the sister of Samantha says that she had never heard of anything like that. There's a couple people in there that deny that ever happened, but it's definitely in the police reports that
it's alleged in the police files.
Absolutely. And
Andrew, I'm sorry, before we go further, I wanted to say that when we played the first excerpt of audio, there were some folks that were having difficulty hearing it and said that it might have been breaking up. So we should probably as well post links to the relevant sections of the audio in the video description, the cleaned audio, so people can listen for themselves, because I do think that there was a technical difficulty with the first excerpt of audio in particular.
Okay. And because I can't see the comment section right now, I have other things pulled up, but right. I mean, were they able to hear it at all? I mean, was anybody?
I know I was having difficulty hearing it. I knew the content of the audio, but yeah, it was breaking up pretty badly. So we should definitely post those links to the cleaned audio on the video description, so people can follow along with us there when they watch the video afterward. And we should also have those clips. We'll get those hopefully up on LakeGenevaCorruption.com, which everyone should go check out.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully this one will be better. We'll see. I'm trying to pull it up now. Okay, let's see.
And the towel? Sign it, trash it? Yep. No, I mean burn it.
Yep, we're destroying.
Just like the pink blanket, ask Mercy, burn it, but she didn't.
You got this, so like I say, rest assured, you might should be able to use it. They say both cases are on here, and then you can read it when I leave, but it just says that she's not going to bring any charges against you. It's got your name on it.
Yeah, these are going bye-bye.
Okay, so in that clip that we just played, could you hear that, Thomas?
Oh, yeah. Unbelievable.
Yeah,
they're talking about openly about destroying evidence. I mean, that's what they're referring to in the audio.
Right. And now, I guess you can make the argument that, well, if there wasn't a murder, then after everything is completely solved or whatever, and then there's no sense to hold on to that evidence. But the problem with that is you don't know whether or not that evidence, just like the pictures that Ecklund and the police department or whoever responsible deleted those nude photos of Samantha. You don't know whether or not any of that evidence can incriminate or exculpate some other individual or John. You don't know that because you didn't look at any of the evidence as relevant to a murder investigation, and you didn't.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, that audio goes to the heart of this, which is this was never treated as anything other than a suicide. They had formed their conclusions before any type of an investigation had any chance to begin. And so that alone, I think, speaks to something rotten here. I mean, whenever you have the agencies involved, the authorities forming the story before they've really investigated it all, before they've looked for the facts that to build some kind of a story. I mean, you're supposed to be taking the facts and then making conclusions based on those facts. You're not supposed to be beginning with a conclusion and then fitting the facts to that conclusion, which appears to be what was done by the police here.
Right. And I got one more audio clip that we're going to talk about, and then we're going to discuss a bunch of different things. I want to play this audio clip. Now, this audio clip is between Steve Compton, which is an attorney for the sister, Mercy Sharkus, and we're gonna get into that next. And essentially, Mercy and two guys, the way I understand it, and if I'm wrong, then we'll correct it. But the way I understand it is that they went to the two guys that Mercy was with at this particular point in time. Okay. All right. I think how it goes is the two guys wanted some weed, or maybe they all did. Hell, I don't know. But they wanted some weed, and they knew one person that had weed, in their possession, and it was Jon Sharkus, right? So they go over there, and the two guys go inside. I think they even rough up John a little bit. They wind up using a fake gun to hold him at gunpoint, etc. And they wind up taking his weed. And she's kind of a party to this, I guess you could say, right? So, right. Make a long story short, Steve Compton is defending her against John in this case. Okay, so she's, Mercy is the client of Steve Compton, but yet Compton is buddy with John. So,
right.
I want to play this audio. I want to play this audio clip, and then we're gonna put up some screenshots, and we're gonna talk about a couple of different things real quick.
All right.
And this is essentially Compton explaining to the mother, Christy, that no charges are going to be brought against John for anything. So,
Ecklund, Draper, and the DA's office have made a decision not to bring charges.
So, and trust me, it's a lot longer than that. That's just the clip that we are supplying right now. But what's interesting about Compton is, Thomas, didn't you have some information on Compton?
Oh, yeah. I actually have an article that I'd like to read the folks listening. The title of the article is "Lawyer Convicted of 2009 Felony Given Green Light to Practice Again." And the article begins, Stephen Compton, a man convicted of felony heroin possession in 2009, can practice law again. The Wisconsin Supreme Court said Friday the reinstatement of Compton, whose license was suspended for 2 years, retroactive to March 2010, came over the objections of two Walworth County Sheriff's deputies who were involved in his 2009 arrest and prosecution. And then it quotes a court order saying both Deputy Sergeant Jeff Patek and Deputy Sheriff Daniel Long recognize Attorney Compton's successful rehabilitation to date, but both men believe the period of Attorney Compton's suspension has not been sufficient given the seriousness of his criminal conduct. Police reports prepared after Compton was arrested quote the lawyer as saying he began to use illegal drugs in 2006 and that he quote unquote admitted to being coked up while handling legal cases in court. So they indicate that not only was he possessing these controlled substances, but he was also convicted of delivering heroin and cocaine. So yeah, Compton is a rather interesting character, especially given the drug connections that all of these characters seem to have, from Jon Sharkus to the family of Detective Ecklund to other individuals associated with this case, that this appears to be connected to drug traffic, and Compton has certainly been involved in the drug scene in Lake Geneva.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned before that it's better call Steve instead of better call Saul, right?
Yeah, and I've of course been pushing for Better Call Len, a spin-off about our friend Len Kaczynski.
But I have a picture here that shows just how close they are. And
yeah, isn't that interesting?
so another interesting aspect to this, Thomas, and I find it, very strange, is, remember we talked about in another video that Miss Samantha was raped by an individual and that he was arrested and his charges wound up getting dropped from the rape against Samantha. And that's one of the things that really bothered her. She never got justice in that case. So here we have Mr. Jon posing with Steve Compton, the man that got the guy off that raped one of his daughters and is representing his other daughter. I mean, is this conflict of interest?
It would seem to be. I mean, it would seem to be a very closely knit circle of drug traffickers and drug associates, and it really, as the more you look into the draw lines between these different characters, it just it's birds of a feather flock together. And I did want to address a comment that somebody made, that it's difficult to predict how people will grieve or react. That's why I'm not willing to fully go after him just on that one image of him holding the autopsy report, because people behave stupidly and bizarrely and everything. But I think if you put that in the context of his connections to people like Compton and his involvement in the traffic of drugs, which we have proof of, and then if you look at that in the context of these other very strange photos that he's putting on social media, the infamous piano wire photo, and what really appears to be child pornography. I mean, when you look at all of that in the context, and then you see him holding up the autopsy report with the smirk on his face and the triumphant message, I think that the whole picture, it presents a very ugly picture of what's going on here.
Well, the thing too is nobody's coming out and saying, I know for a fact that Jon murdered his daughter. But what we are saying is, and Jon agrees through his statements and various posts or what have you, is that he don't think the evidence makes sense either. He don't think that Samantha committed suicide. He thinks that somebody's murdered. He is stuck with that.
Jon's on record.
He is stuck with that story from the very beginning. So, it's not like we're the only ones that think this. He thinks it himself. So
no, it's just to me, the forensics and the crime scene photos. I mean, the story as it's been told makes no sense whatsoever, which makes the lack of any investigation by the Lake Geneva authorities all the more inexplicable and all the more really just infuriating when you see how this case was investigated, or rather how it was not investigated. Despite very clear evidence, I would say that there was some type of a struggle that took place. And as you said, Jon is on record numerous times saying that he believes that she was murdered. So, and that's the other thing, is that I wouldn't even immediately say that I think that he created a situation where that basically led to her death. That's my opinion. That's my the situation he cultivated. I believe led to her death. If it was not for Jon Sharkus and his this quote unquote upbringing by Jon Sharkus, the environment that he created, I believe that Samantha would have been alive today. And but that doesn't even mean that I think that he physically killed her. It could have been one of these other individuals that he is associated with, and he could know more than he's letting on about it. There's any number of possibilities here, but I just think that one of the only things that I feel absolutely positive of is that she was murdered, and that he knows a lot more than he's letting on.
Right, absolutely, and I think that goes to the heart of what we're talking about as well, and we've been reiterating over and over again, is that it'd be a lot harder to prove now. I mean, there's speculation that not Ray, but another neighbor or somebody that was in the vicinity could have did it. I mean, think about this. Let's say John went outside and maybe he thought it was 5 minutes, but say he was on one of the various different drugs that he uses or keeps in his possession that he never gets in trouble for. Let's say he thought he was outside for 5 minutes and he was outside for 30 minutes. And let's say somebody did go in there and kill Samantha. Well, guess what? When the police show up, and let's say they even kill her in a way and stage the body to make it, let's just hypothetically speak and say that his original story before it changes 1,000 times is true, where he goes in there and he sees her hanging. Let's say somebody even did that. Okay. Well, now you're never going to know exactly what happened, because from the moment the police roll up in there, they never treat anything like a crime scene. I mean, to me, what should have happened was, as soon as you have the body secured and you're getting the breather on her, whatever, and you're doing all these different things to her to get her prepped for transit to the hospital, as soon as that's out of the way, there should be, it should be taped off. Everything should be looked at, because, I mean, can it be that easy to cover up a murder to where you just say, well, my daughter hung herself, and when it's a possibility that she literally could have been murdered and none of the evidence or the crime scene is ever, viewed in that way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are so many things that should have been done that were not done, and I mean, I think that it's an absolute mockery, is what the investigation is. I think that the Lake Geneva authorities and Walworth County and everything have really continued the mockery of Samantha's death, which absolutely, when I see that photo of him with the autopsy report, it does make me a little bit crazy, because it looks to me like he's I don't know, it looks to me like he's taunting people. Basically, that's how I react when I see it. That's what it looks like to me, because I can't fathom why he would do that.
Why would you?
But I just want to say before, and that's a very important image as well. She can't touch me. I'm like one of the most protected, albeit not loved, person in Walworth County. What does that mean? I mean, what's seriously, ask yourselves, what does he mean by protected? Who is protecting him? And then when you put it all together with the absolute fraudulent investigation, if it can be even called such, then I really think that it becomes very clear that he feels that he is protected by the power structure in Walworth County and in Lake Geneva. And I think that the way things have played out here has very much showed that. And before we move on, I wanted to point out a statement that Crystal made that's a very good point. If Jon Sharkus agrees that Sam was murdered, why did he tell Detective Ecklund to burn the towel? And now I think, if you want my speculation,
yeah, that's a very good point.
And I mean, I think that Jon Sharkus is not going with the suicide story now because he wants to cover his bases. He wants to kind of get ahead of the story. I think that whatever happened is that he knows a lot more about what happened than I can't see any scenario where this would have happened and he doesn't know more about it than he's said already. So, and I believe that he absolutely intends to cover this up, but he intends to simultaneously look like the activist, look like he's pushing for an investigation of it, so as to disguise his own role in the whole thing.
And one thing that gets me when we're talking about the other case that's kind of involved in this is, let me get this straight, okay? A girl and two boys go to a guy's house that's, regardless of the relationship, okay? We're just talking about the situation. A girl and two guys go to a guy's house. They rob him, take his money, whatever, and his dope. Okay, they take his drugs. Now, they all get arrested, but the person that owned and had all of the drugs, nothing happens to him. I mean, I don't understand. I mean, it just goes to show that look, I've talked to some police officers in the last few weeks. Okay. And sometimes you will have, the police departments, they will have various informants or whatever. But at what point are you going to allow a person to keep distributing things, because then you start looking at, well, is this a conspiracy of some sort? Does this guy have something on government officials, or is he supplying government officials with certain drugs or various
and also the government officials are ultimately operating the drug trade itself, the illegal drug trade. And you can look up, there's reams and reams of evidence, government documents and everything from the what was going on with the Contras, where they were bringing crack cocaine into U.S. cities and using that to fund their illegal operations in Nicaragua, when they were trafficking heroin from Vietnam during the war. The U.S. intelligence agencies took over the heroin trade in Vietnam. They had a big Pepsi bottling facility, actually, that was not actually making any type of Pepsi soda, or they weren't actually making the drink at all. It was a Pepsi facility, but it was actually just making heroin, and it was under the auspices of the CIA. So historically, if you look through it's always been from the local street level to the national global drug trade. It's always been owned and operated by some of the most powerful people on this planet, and it really is the top down. And the ones that get busted and arrested and taken away, I think, are the competition being rubbed out, and they're consolidating their own power and everything. They're and a lot of these guys who are quote unquote confidential informants, they're part of the drug war. They're working for the good guys. No, they're the guys that are really running the drug trade, and they're protected with the excuse being that they're working for the good guys. They're confidential informants. No, that's just a means of protecting an intelligence asset who you're using for something else. And I think that Jon Sharkus is very possibly, I think it's a distinct possibility that he's an example of that he is somebody who is useful to them as a drug connection, as possibly other types of things that he could be supplying them. I think we can all figure that out. That somebody like him, if it ever is exposed that he has this relationship with city and police officials, that he has this protection, they'll just turn around and say, oh, well, yeah, he's a confidential informant. He's helping us clean up the streets, because that's what they always say.
Right.
It's a bunch of garbage.
And I want to add to this, another piece of the puzzle to this is, from what I hear, and hopefully all of you remember about the names that I mentioned before I even came across this case. I already had articles and information that I wanted to do on Philip Koss from Walworth County. And so interestingly enough, Thomas, the judge that's in the sister's case, the party to an armed robbery, the judge is none other than Philip Koss. Now, back when Koss was a district attorney, I just want to put this out there real quick from one of my articles. It says that in a recent history of aggressive prosecutions, error, and misconduct, since 1990, the year District Attorney Philip Koss was elected to office, there have been at least 26 appellate decisions addressing alleged prosecutorial error. In the 20 years before that, there were only 3. So since Koss was elected, they're saying that 26 cases have went to the appellate courts.
Right.
And in 11 of those 26 cases, the judges ruled that the prosecutor's conduct required reversing the defendant's conviction. So, as you've stated many a times before, Thomas, and I always remember your favorite statements and stuff, but anytime it seems like when you have all this corruption going on and you have all this wrongdoing and mischievous behavior from these district attorneys and police officers, it seems like they get promoted. I mean, if you had all this going on in this county, how the heck did this guy get elected judge?
I mean, that's just it. I mean, you see, and that's what puts the lie to the what I term broadly the incompetence theory, where they look at all of this as being failings of the system that are somehow mistakes. Like it's a good system, but it's not perfect. You know, that whole line of garbage. I mean, it's what puts the lie to that is when the people who are making these mistakes are consistently enjoying upward mobility in their careers, and that is something you see across the board at the national level, at the state level, at city level, and everything. You certainly saw it with Manawoc. I mean, you saw Kaczynski, of course, who, you know, he ends up getting a judgeship. Mark Rohrer got a judgeship. Everybody involved there got promoted. Or made a lot of money with books like Griesbach and Kratz. But I mean, you know, get to be media stars. But I mean, Judge Philip Koss is certainly an interesting case study here because yeah, he was according to things that I've read online about Judge Koss. There's actually a blog that was written a few years before Samantha Sharkus died, and this blog was accusing Koss and multiple other Walworth County officials of corruption. And I believe it's the same blog that documents in detail how Koss had multiple charges of prosecutorial misconduct against him. And one of the interesting things about that was that 3 of these cases, at least 3, I believe there were more, 3 of these cases had to do with child sex crimes. And in all 3 of these cases, he had a conviction. And this, of course, was not while he was a judge. I don't know if I said that, but yeah, this is while he was the DA of Walworth County, and he was said to be aggressively, some said overzealously, prosecuting child sex crimes. But in a number of these instances where he's prosecuting these crimes, the convictions ended up reversed because he was basically just ignoring, you know, existing laws. So there's different circumstances in each of these cases, but it led me to wonder whether in fact he was overzealous or whether he was actually interested in taking control of these cases and possibly sabotaging them, like a reverse Kaczynski. You know, Kaczynski on the prosecution side, you know, they case comes that maybe they don't want to go through, and they have it sabotaged by a dirty prosecutor.
A very interesting thought, Thomas. I've never thought about it from that angle.
You know that he could be protecting these people, and I one of the things that definitely, I mean, sent my eyebrows straight up was when I saw that Judge Koss had taken a trip to Latvia in 2003 to the nation of Latvia. I mean, Judge Koss from Little Walworth County going to Latvia to train the country's judiciary, train their legislators, train their police, train their prosecutors in how to deal with child abuse. And now that's very, very interesting for a very specific reason. And that's because in 2000, 3 years before Judge Koss, yes, he was Judge Koss at that point, ends up going to train Latvia's lawmakers on how to deal with child abuse. 3 years before that, the entire government of Latvia had almost been brought down by a giant pedophile scandal where the prime minister was implicated, the justice minister was implicated, multiple cabinet officials were implicated. And it was basically like the entire Latvian government was looking like it was a giant state-sponsored pedophile ring. And I'm gonna, I know that sounds crazy probably to a lot of the folks out there.
No,
so I'm
true.
just gonna go ahead.
Myself, yeah.
I'm just gonna go ahead and read the portion of this article from The Guardian. It is by Ian Trainer, and this is the Guardian newspaper, the well-known British paper, March 10th, 2000. And the title of the article is "Child Sex Accusations Rock Latvian Cabinet." The article begins: "The Baltic state of Latvia is in the throes of a child abuse scandal that allegedly reaches to the very heart of the cabinet, threatening to bring down the government and end the careers of several of the country's top politicians. As a result of information unearthed by journalists and a parliamentary commission, 6 men are in jail awaiting trial on charges of child abuse, pornography involving minors, and selling children into sexual slavery abroad. The Prime Minister, Andrei Skell, 42, is fighting to salvage his reputation and his political life after being named controversially in Parliament as possibly being embroiled in the pedophile ring. Latvia's Prosecutor General, Jonas Skrastins, don't ask me to pronounce that, is alleged to have tried to cover up the matter, along with several colleagues who have also been sacked. And so you have this enormous pedophile scandal in Latvia in which multiple government officials are implicated, and that's in 2000. And then 3 years later, You know, how much changed in 3 years? I mean, 3 years later, you have the same Judge Koss that we're looking at taking a trip from Walworth County to Latvia, where he's become a advisor to foreign governments. Apparently, I mean, it just is. The whole thing looks very suspicious to me. Like, you know, I've suspected for a while. I mean, I think it's there's very clear evidence that a lot, just like the drug trade, the human traffic and child traffic is a global operation, and a lot of these rings that get, you know, a lot of these rings that you see folded up in Latvia or Belgium or Britain or Russia. And I say all these names of countries because they've all had these giant pedophile scandals, very similar to the one that I just introduced you all to. You can find, you know, with Belgium, of course, there is the Dutroux case. I mean, there's any number of examples that I could list here. There's an article, I think, that traces a lot of them that's called the Pedophocracy. And it's a disturbing title, Pedophracy, I believe it's spelled. And that's an article by Dave McGowan, the late, great author of Program to Kill. He wrote this article, The Pedophocracy, and it was basically tracing all of these pedophile rings that were operating in these different countries, involving top cabinet officials in all of these different nations. And he cites all of the mainstream news articles, you know, to back all of this up. You know, it's amazing that we don't all get taught about this, and that we don't all learn it coming up. I mean, despite the unbelievable gravity of these scandals, they are basically just left unknown to most people, you know, if you don't, you know. And so I think it's distinctly possible, based on the timing of this trip to Latvia and the nature of this trip, that Judge Koss could have been involved in this type of a global ring, as covering it up, as part of this apparatus, this global apparatus involved. But yeah, absolutely. And I'll post a link in the comments to the article that I'm talking about, the Pedophocracy. It is an absolute must read, and I think it forms the context of a lot of what we're talking about here tonight. And yeah, so just to sum up again, in 2000, a major pedophile scandal basically implicates half of Latvia's cabinet, including the prime minister and the justice minister. And then you have only 3 years later, you have Judge Phil Koss from Little Walworth County being hired for some reason to go to Latvia and advise the lawmakers on how to deal with child abuse. You know, I find that very bizarre.
Well, if he wants to deal with child abuse, maybe he could start in his own dang county, because from the sound of it, they got a whole hell of a lot of it going on over there. When you're raising kids around drugs and you have your kids selling drugs for you and they got all this shit going on, maybe you should start in your own county before you try to go to another country and worry about what's going on over there. Because from the looks of his record and his prosecutorial misconduct, he don't need to be training anybody on anything.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe training them on how to get convictions reversed, how to sabotage convictions. You know, I mean, you know, that's you know, I think that with all of the stuff that we've done in the past with our talks and a lot of my research, I think that the pedophocracy has its tentacles well entrenched in Wisconsin.
Right. So, I mean, it's a shame that you can't elect people in a lot of these situations and expect them to do their job. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of good judges and lawyers and police officers and, you know, all the way across the board, you know, FBI. But with anything, anywhere, you always have some bad apples. And when you start having a trend and a track record of all of these different things going on, taking place, and I'm shocked, to be honest with you, especially in a small town, because everybody knows everybody. I would be interested, put it to you this way. I would be interested to see, particularly on those 11 cases, who was involved in those 11 cases that their convictions got completely overturned.
I would be very interested in that. I would be very interested in that. I speculate that we would find that they are individuals like Jon Sharkus. Not Jon Sharkus specifically, but individuals like that, individuals who have those kinds of connections and, you know, are able to get cases thrown.
Absolutely. And that's something that I'm not sure how we would even get started, but that's something that I was thinking about while we was discussing this, that I would absolutely love to look into next, because I never thought about it from that perspective, Thomas. So when you said that, it really opened my mind to that, because I've always thought about it. Well, he's trying to prosecute somebody and he's bending the rules. Well, maybe he was trying to get it overturned on purpose, So, I mean,
I've seen a lot of instances of that, actually. I've seen a lot of instances where it looks like a prosecutor who was connected to somebody who was a defendant in the case, where that same prosecutor is going after them and appears to be going after them really hard. But in actuality, the prosecutor, usually in cahoots with the judge, is breaking laws on purpose and ignoring the Constitution on purpose, just so that the defendant in question can get the case overturned on appeal.
Okay. Well, look, we're definitely going to try to get these audio clips on a link to where people can listen to them for themselves, because I knew it was going to be a tough task trying to make it to where people could hear it over this platform like this. So maybe, because like I said, we have tons more audio files, including the 911 call. And so maybe before the next video, I could figure something out to where we can have a little bit better system in place to play the next audio files. But everybody, make sure, as always, like to bring up Thomas Myrtle, and the website he's associated with is www.cavdef.org. Is CAVDEF, and they have a bunch of information that pertains to various cases, and also, election fraud and things like that. So if you haven't already, go check out his website and bookmark.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so, Thomas, before we leave, if you do have anything, do you want to add anything else before we leave on cost, Compton, or this situation in general?
Yeah, in general, I'm looking at Manawoc in particular as a portal of child pornography. If you look at the history of Manawoc County, I know this is a little bit off topic, but it connects directly to Walworth County, I think, in the grand scheme of things. If you look up the history of Manawoc County, you will see a disturbing number of cases in which people have been captured, have been arrested with large caches of child pornography. And in at least several of these instances, it appears clear that the production of that material, of that disgusting material, was local, that they were seeking out local kids and basically luring them into these situations and using them, exploiting them for these images and stuff. That this is a huge problem in Manawoc County that's never talked about, and Walworth County is evidently exactly just quite as bad. And it's if you look at the state of Wisconsin on the whole, I know we talked about Thomas Fallon before, who's involved in many of these cases, and I'm not going to go too deep into him because we're wrapping things up. But if you look at what he did for the Wisconsin DOJ, it's interesting that his job primarily concerns child sex crimes and child pornography and such. So it's kind of, I think, when you have a guy with the character of Thomas Fallon overseeing those types of cases, I think it is something akin to the fox guarding the hen house. And I hope that we can shed more light on the Samantha Sharkus case. And I'm still going through a lot of the material, and I think we can, and I hope we can put this out there and hopefully affect some type of justice, or at least exposure of these people.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole goal. And so yeah, I mean, we're not even scratching the surface here. We have tons of information that we can come out with in the future regarding this case. And look, I know everybody mainly that subscribe to this channel, they like hearing about the Stephen Avery case, but when we have cases like this that have direct similarities to the level of corruption that we see in the Stephen Avery case, especially that close to that case, I think it's always important to bring up the corruption, because if nobody talks about it, it's just going to keep going on and on and on. It needs to be talked about, and it needs to be pointed out so it can be recognized. Because, I mean, just like Ecklund's cousin, that's been arrested numerous times, and every one of the charges have been dropped.
20 charges, 19 of which were dismissed.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's crazy. You have good people out there following the law, and then you have people, a whole host of people that break the law, 80% of which have no special treatment. They get thrown in the jail, and thrown in prison. They get
this is a special class we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Special class of folks who operate above the law, and it really is despicable. And what we're doing here tonight is the only way to stop it, I think, is to expose as much of it as possible. Sometimes I get depressed and feel like this system is so corrupt and things are just, everybody's like, it seems like every agency is complicit and the news media doesn't want to talk about it. And it's so many instances like the Dutroux case in Belgium where you look at it and it's documented, it's proven that everybody was complicit as in terms of the child care agencies and law enforcement. And then you only have these few lights in the darkness, and that's what we're doing tonight. We got to be those lights in the darkness. We have to be, because it really is something that most people, I think, flee from because it's just so horrible that they can't even look at it. And one thing I wanted to bring up before we closed here tonight was talking about the case of Ecklund's cousin, as well as some of the other officials in this case. I had something I wanted to say. I can't place my finger on it now, but unfortunately. But in any case, I think that oh yes, I remember now. Now there's an information that I saw that I can't verify, but I think it comes from it came from a source and they posted it publicly, so I'm comfortable saying it. They said that Jon Sharkus had been surreptitiously recording and many of the people who were doing drugs with him, and that this footage was that he was compiling footage of people doing drugs with him, all of these local people in this scene. I would like to draw a parallel from that to what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, and what other characters like Jeffrey Epstein were doing, where they were compiling photos and videos, images of people doing illegal things, and kind of forming a blackmail operation. I think that that's very possibly what Jon was in part doing. I found that comment very interesting when they said that Jon was recording people without their knowledge doing drugs and stuff, doing crack. That very much sounds similar to what people like Epstein were doing at a larger scale or a higher level. And that could be part of this operation. Could be the police luring people into Jon's little drug circle and then getting blackmail material on them.
All it takes is one high-level official to get dirt on, and then they can control and suppress a lot of what's below them, So, I mean, it's very interesting, and we're definitely going to find out where the trails lead, because, it's not right, and it needs to be dealt with. So,
absolutely.
I want to tell everyone that's joined and to watch this live, and anybody that's going to watch it in the future, that we appreciate any of your attention and watching this. And hopefully we can get those links to the audio files put up for you in case it was distorted or you couldn't hear it. But that's going to be it for tonight. And Thomas, as always, I appreciate having you on. It's been absolutely great. And I think that, the more we do this and get familiar with this case, because we can spit off stuff about, Stephen Avery all day because we worked on it or thought about it or researched it 1,000 times. But when you start dealing with a new case, sometimes you get a little tongue tied to, laying it all out. But I want to just tell everybody, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, go ahead and do so if you care to, and make sure you like this video. But more importantly, share this video in any platform that you want to, because the whole purpose of doing this is not to talk amongst ourselves. We need to get the word out and make people aware of some of the things that could possibly be going on in communities surrounding them. So that's going to be it for tonight. I appreciate everybody coming, and thank you for all your continued support.
Always a pleasure, Andrew. Have a good night, folks.